Namah Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Ite Namani.
There were 2 or 3 of us asking for initiation, so we each wrote him a personal letter. And I remember that distinctly too, because in the letter I wrote, a few things, how it was going for me and my commitment to Krishna consciousness. But I remember putting in there that I was becoming very happy following this process. So when I got the letter back from Prabhupada that accept me as a disciple, I really noted how that's what he focused on. That, I'm so glad that you're becoming happy. And, at that time and even later I've thought about that and how, in a way, that really characterizes to me a lot of what Prabhupada felt towards not just his disciples, but in the way people of the world, that he really wanted everyone to become happy. And he was teaching us about Krishna consciousness because from his enlightened perspective, he could see that we wouldn't become happy through any other means than realizing our constitutional position. So as we started to feel that and experience that even in a very limited way, he immediately picked up on it and encouraged that. And I remember that quite distinctly too from that initial letter. And the first time he actually communicated with me, and said, my dear Bhutatma, which was, I got the name at that time too, of course. We were walking along, and maybe everyone has heard this by now, but we were walking along, Prabhupada stopped. Now, I grew up near the beach, and I used to surf and live, camp on the beach a lot overnight. And like a lot of other people, I suppose, I always really enjoyed the sound of the waves as they break and then draw back out. It makes kind of that, that real pleasing sound as it comes in and then ebbs back out. And we stopped and we were listening to that for a minute. Prabhupada stopped on the beach, and then he said, "This sound of the waves retreating is the sound of the gopis sighing for Krishna." And I always thought, well, no wonder it's so pleasing. And ever since then, when I hear that sound, of course, I think of that and how it is really kind of a mournful, bittersweet sound, So that was nice. We were walking, this was in Cheviot Hills, because either he would go to Venice Beach or Cheviot Hills most frequently. So we were in Cheviot Hills, and this was the time frame where Bali Mardon was involved with that Japanese woman. It turned out to be a big sham, but at the time everyone thought she was heir to Toyota fortune and so forth. So he was dressed in his kind of John Lennon outfit, all white with the gold chains and everything. And he was always very much a gentleman, as my experience, Bali Mardon. So we were walking, and there was about 6 of us, and Karandar and Bali Mardon and I had kind of lagged behind towards the end of the walk because I was asking, I mentioned this to Karandar, and now I was bringing up to Bali Mardon of whether he could loan some money to San Francisco Temple because we wanted to buy this property in Hayward. And we were going to kind of expand the temple in that direction where householders could live. They had some duplexes. So I was running that by him. And I remember during the conversation kind of thinking, well, this is kind of a big deal. Maybe we'll get this money and so forth and so on. And during it, we'd kind of drop back, and we were having a little private discussion. And Prabhupada was walking ahead, and it was towards the end of the walk, so we were still talking. We got into the car, and Prabhupada was almost to the car. And he stopped and turned around and looked at us because he was with the other devotees and even saying some things to them. And he turned and looked at us, and I remember it hit me because the look he gave was not at all pleased. It was like, Prabhupada's looks could be very complex. There was a lot going on there. But I don't know, the best way maybe I could describe it, how I felt, was kind of like, there you are playing with the broken glass. You think that you're making some plan to expand the movement, and here is Krishna's pure devotee, and you've separated yourself, and you're in this, mental state. And of course, then when it turned out that there wasn't even any money there, it even exacerbated the foolishness of it. But I still remember that look very clearly, and it was like, gee, Christmas. What am I thinking, you know? I'm back here. We could talk about this anytime. These precious moments with Prabhupada. I'm letting my little sense of self-importance run away from me. Prabhupada had been just, you know, how he would sometimes speak on kind of things dealing with how the way people are in the world, the way the world works, and so forth, from a Krishna conscious perspective. So he was doing that, and somehow I was giving very good responses to those observations. Like he would say something, and then I would come up with an observation that he liked. I mean, it was apparently he liked. He would smile. Like for example, he had these little glass for eyeglasses, the little tissues that you clean with. He pulled one out, and he was saying something like, "These things they cost them nothing to manufacture, and they sell them for 3 rupees or something." And I would said something to the effect like, "Yes, bro, that's the profit motive of the karmis." He goes, "Yes," you know. So it was kind of like that. It went on a few times like that, and I started to get a little sense of myself as really, you know, like right there with Prabhupada, you know, having these exchanges. It was subtle, but somehow my ego was, you know, swelling up a little bit inside me. And so then I asked him something about Iran, because there was some question with the Treya Rishi and going there. And so I brought it up, and it's like Prabhupada looked at me, and it's like, by then I think it was, he kind of had enough. He looked at me, it was like, he just kind of looked away, you know. And to this day, I don't know what was going on, you know, whether he was just thinking of something else. But to me, it felt like he was saying, "Okay, you know, we're going to squeeze you down the sides." And he looked away, and I felt really, really bad, you know, like, well, yeah, I was getting full of myself, and, you know, I'm so conditioned, you know. And so I felt bad, even on into the night, I really did, you know, because in Mayapur, you know, it's such an atmosphere, everything is amplified. So the next morning, we were having the Guru Puja, and Prabhupada he would circumambulate the temple room, you know, inside. Go around, he would stop and ring a bell at different spots. The devotees would get real ecstatic, you know, how it was all around him chanting, and he'd ring the bell in time with the kirtan. So he started to do that, and we just made the first stop, and I was chanting. I was feeling very blissful, but I still had that little thing in my heart of, you know, I was such a klutz, you know. And just as I was kind of thinking that and feeling kind of the dichotomy between the bliss of the kirtan and that little pebble in my shoe, Prabhupada turned and looked right at me as he's ringing the bell. And he just looked at me for like, I don't know how long, but a long time, and just smiling, just radiating bliss, you know. And I just, you know, it kind of just washed over me, and it was like, don't take it too seriously. I was just cuffing you a little bit, you know. We were in the room. I was there with, I forget who else was there. It was just maybe another person with me. I know there's one other person. And then Krishnadas came in with his wife. And I don't really know what reminded me of this, but he came in with his wife, and he'd been in Sweden trying to open the temple. And he had a wife and a little son. And so they came in, and they were telling Prabhupada, basically explaining. We'd been in there talking to Prabhupada, and then he came in. He'd just come in and arrived. He was basically explaining to Prabhupada why he hadn't been able to stay in Sweden. And I was in there was another brahmachari with me, and we kind of looked at each other because his wife had come in wearing a sweater that was a rather tight-fitting sweater. You know, for us, it's like, really, it seemed it's not really appropriate. You're coming for the guru, you know. You should wear a sari and so forth, dress modestly, you know. And so, you know, it just seemed a little... And then Krishnadas was kind of making these... Prabhupada was pushing him a little bit. But, you know, he was kind of making what seemed to us kind of excuses, right? And so after he gave his spiel, Prabhupada was listening and so forth. And he was all done. And I didn't know, I have any idea how Prabhupada would respond, of course. You never do. And Prabhupada looked at him kind of, you know, thoughtfully and said, he simply said, his name was Krishnadas, as I said. He goes, "You are not Krishnadas, you are Maya Das." You know? It was like, whew, you know? And it kind of fit. There was his wife, you know, and Prabhupada said, he goes, "When I came to your country," he goes, "there was no question of peaceful retreat." He goes, "It was victory or death." You know, really like hammering him, you know, We're like, wow. And, Krishna House is kind of like, kind of see him getting smaller, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, he's getting smaller. And then Prabhupada kind of lightened up, and at the end he said, "Can I have my son touch your feet?" Prabhupada said, "Yes, sure." So he did that, and he left the room. But it was obviously a lesson to us that Prabhupada was not that pleased when we rationalized things. It would have been better just to say, "I really couldn't cut it," and so forth. Some other times we met with Prabhupada in his room in L.A. I remember one occasion we were on traveling Sankirtan down there, and this was very early, may have been the first traveling Sankirtan party, certainly among the first. And we just started selling big books in San Francisco. It kind of caught on, and people were going out and so forth. So we were down there, but it was very new. And as I mentioned, Buddhimanta, Yogesh Chandra, Keshav, and I were on this party, and we were getting some criticism because we weren't really at the temple, eating temple prasadam and so forth. But to us that was kind of part of the whole spirit of it. You're out there on the front lines, and I don't know what we would eat, like sour cream and dates or something, a lot of that kind of food. But a lot of days we wouldn't get temple prasadam, and so forth, and you figure out ways to offer foods and so forth in that situation. But we were getting criticized from some quarters, so we went to Prabhupada and just kind of said, we think we're doing the right thing, but some people say, no, we need to be eating temple prasadam. It's not good for our spiritual life. I remember Prabhupada looked at us, and he leaned forward, and he took his hands like he was playing kartals, like doing Sankirtan. He goes, "You just go out and sell my books," like that. He goes, "You can eat it." Like that, real forcefully, And we were like, of course, totally vindicated. It's like, yeah, okay, we do understand what he wants, out there selling his books is the right, kind of smash the critics, once and for all. The other program that we had was really different in tone. I had made friends with one of the professors at Berkeley. He was in the religious studies department, a fellow named Mark Juergensmeyer, who now is at Santa Barbara. Actually, I've seen him interviewed on CNN a few times about Islam and so forth. He's become a noted religious scholar. At that time, he was a younger professor, but he became quite friendly, and we had some discussions. I said, well, Prabhupada is, ask him to come up, and what do you think about having a program with some of the faculty? And he was very agreeable to that. He was, enthusiastic to do it. And one of the people he invited was Dr. Stahl, who there had been that brochure of exchanges, remember, between Prabhupada and Dr. Stahl discussing the Vedas and kind of the meaning of the Vedas. It was a scholarly exchange, and Dr. Stahl had a little different view than Prabhupada. And it was printed as a brochure, and we used to pass it out kind of to validate the scholarly nature of our movement. And so Dr. Stahl was a bit of a well-known quantity in our movement. So that was good. He was coming. So we prepared a room, and there was going to be, and it ended up, there was about 40 or 50. Most of the faculty brought their wives, so there's 20, 25 faculty and their wives. So it was quite a big turnout for that kind of a group. But they were very interested to meet Prabhupada. And of course, it created a little buzz because of the background, the history, and so forth. So we set up a room, and we had, there was a table, so we brought a Vyasasan and put it on top of the table, which I think to them when they came in seemed a little pretentious. Here's this colorful big chair with peacocks on it that, the base of it is about head height for them, And Americans were all very egalitarian. Everyone puts their pants on one leg at a time and so forth. So I could sense there was a little, not really, scorn, but a little bit of maybe a little questioning, the appropriateness of it, perhaps. I sensed that a little bit. I hadn't thought about it before. So anyhow, that's there. And we had a few seats on the side. Pradyumna and Swarup Damodar and myself were there. I don't know if there were any others or not. But Prabhupada arrived, and I'd been there kind of fixing things, and then Prabhupada arrived, and everyone was seated by then. It was due to start at, say, 7, and then, so I went out to see if Prabhupada was there, and they were on time, so we started walking up, And I remember it was kind of you know, Berkeley has a lot of older kind of wooden buildings, and as we walk up, I was like, well, Prabhupada, it's kind of an old building, but, you know, and he's like, we don't care, old or new, the building doesn't matter, right, you know. So we walk up, and the entrance to the room was such that you entered from the back, or so to speak, to the backs of the people. They were facing the other way, and the entrance was the back. So as we opened the door, and Prabhupada walked in, I held the door, and he walked in, but I could see everyone's expressions. They turned around. And the minute they saw him, you know, like I said, there was kind of a little bit of an edge, very subtle to the atmosphere. The minute they turned around and saw Prabhupada, he was, you know, in his saffron, and he was smiling, and just such a, you know, a transcendent figure. You could just see everyone melted right from the get-go. It was like, you know, all their senses of any pretension or pomposity or anything was eliminated. And they just felt, well, here's a real saint. You know, they could sense it. And Prabhupada smiled, and he walked up, and, you know, he got up there very naturally, like, yes, this is, you know, I do belong here, I'm representing Vyas. And he spoke to them about Vedic culture and Brahminical culture and things, not really about Radha Krishna, but more about Brahminical culture and so forth. And I remember after the talk, as I said, the three of us were kind of sitting to the side here. And so one of the professors asked, he said, you know, you're interested in making people Brahmins and bringing this to the West, that we need Brahmins. He said, what about your followers here? Are they Brahmins? I was thinking, you know, I was wondering what's Prabhupada going to say, you know, because really we're not, you know. And but Prabhupada handled it so adeptly. He said, they are trying to become Brahmins. But, you know, his tone was such, it wasn't like they're just struggling vainly, but really, you know, they, you know, they're going to be successful, but now they're on the path. You know, it was very nicely handled and disarmed the whole thing, and kind of gave us the appropriate status. You know, that we were sincere and we were following the correct process, but yet, you know, we were still conditioned in such a way that we're in the modes of, at least for me, certainly in the modes of passion and ignorance still predominantly. And he had a little exchange with Dr. Stahl when he got up there. He looked around, and he's you know, he's glad. You know, I think he was pleased by the turnout. Actually, he said, oh, I see Dr. Stahl is here. And he said something, I see the illustrious Dr. Stahl, or gave him flattered him a little bit. And, you know, that really made him very happy, of course, because, I mean, every time I saw Prabhupada interact with anyone, I mean, the one common theme was Prabhupada was always completely in command. And not by dint of assertiveness, but just by dint of everyone knew here was a, you know, whatever level they understood it, they knew here's a bona fide representative of God. And there was never the trace of, you know, of lack of confidence, you know, never any hubris or pride, but just that overwhelming sense of self-confidence that comes when you're actually self-realized. And, you know, everyone there sensed that as well. So, you know, he was, you know, they were very flattered that he would acknowledge their scholarship and so forth. And then I remember we left the meeting, and Prabhupada said to me, he said, this was a very important meeting, you know, to meet with these scholars like this, to establish the credibility of our movement. So that was nice, because it did go very, very well. And even one person came up to me, I don't know, it wasn't Stahl or Juergensmeyer, but one came up after me and said, you know, I was a little skeptical in the beginning. It kind of confirmed my take on things. He said, I was a little skeptical in the beginning. He says, but once when I heard him speak, he goes, I thought, well, maybe this will be some kind of elderly Bengali Brahmin who's, you know, a little bit caste conscious. He goes, after I heard him speak, I really understood this is, you know, this person is something very special. So that really kind of confirmed what I had perceived happening there in that room.
Prachu